You are now watching the official YouTube channel for the largest basketball manager game in the world. Join at BuzzerBeater.com if you think you can beat the buzzer.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Bubbles BuzzerBeater, the official BuzzerBeater YouTube channel. Today I wanted to cover a topic that has been requested over and over and over again, and I know I have a video on it that's a little bit outdated, but today I wanted to talk about the draft and kind of scouting. So I wanted to update the guide on it because since 19-year-olds have boosted skills compared to the last time I did the scouting and draft guide, I wanted to update it and just see how my strategy changes and if any suggestions change. But a lot of the information might seem very similar to the first video because that video still had a lot of useful information. But I just wanted to revamp the whole thing and just give an updated version of this draft guide. So starting off with how is the draft order set? The draft order is decided by giving whoever has the worst record across both conferences the number one overall pick. And then the following picks go to whoever has the worst records regardless of seeding in their respective conferences. So the order is decided solely on who has the fewest wins, and if there's a couple of teams with the same record to end the season, the tiebreaker for who gets the better draft pick is whichever team has the worst point differential. So, for example, if the draft were to happen right now in my Division III Utopia League, the Falknersburg Friars would have the first overall pick. My Bubbles Exploded team would have the second overall pick, and then the Joachim Maniacs 2 would have the third pick. Despite the Maniacs being the 8th seed in their conference, since our Bubbles Exploded team has the same record but a worse point differential, the Maniacs would fall to the third spot. And then the only instance where this is not the case is if a team forfeits a game. So every forfeited game that a team has drops them one spot in the draft order. For example, if a team has a 2-14 record in this league with a minus 746 point differential, they would have the second overall pick in front of our Bubbles Exploded team. However, if they forfeited 2 games this season, indicated by the asterisk next to the record, then they would actually drop 2 spots in the draft order to the 4th pick. So 1 drop for each forfeit. And then moving on to background on preset draft order stuff. You can gain anywhere from 1 to 4 scouting points every single week. However, the more scouting points that you build up, the more expensive it is. So, as you can see, the best value for scouting is 2 points a week or $5,000 a point. And then if you do elect to pay for 3 or 4 scouting points per week, feel free to do so, but do notice that it is much more expensive for cost per scouting point. And then the other good thing to know is that scouting points do also carry over to future seasons if you decide not to use them for your current season's draft. So if you're a team who's pushing for the playoffs and you'd be like the 13th or 14th pick in the draft, I know many teams elect to not scout at all and just carry over those scouting points to the next season until you have a better draft pick. As for when the draft and scouting becomes available, so the preset draft order first becomes available directly after the All-Star game is completed, and this preset order is completely randomized. So an important thing to know is that the gray balls shown next to the prospects mean absolutely nothing. In this example, player number 6 with 5 gray balls next to him for one manager can be the exact same player as player number 48 with 1 gray ball next to him for another manager. And this is looking at the same league and the same draft board. So I repeat, the gray balls do not matter, but I know that this can be confusing for newer managers, which is why I wanted to emphasize it. And then just the last little thing for the prep is that in every buzzer beater draft, there are 3 rounds where each team selects 3 players. And then, as I said, most teams are generally not investing very much into the draft unless you have like a top 5 pick. However, if many teams are not scouting in your league at all, it is possible for you to seal a good draftee later on in the first round or even later. I know historically I had a draft where in the second and third rounds, I actually drafted a Hall of Fame 18-year-old and an MVP 18-year-old with like the 13th pick. So I had a very, very good draft, and just know that drafts, I think, overall are better too, where I think there's more usable prospects since 19-year-olds have received a boost. And that kind of transitions me to the next thing, which is the 19-year-olds have received a boost. So this is the main reason that my recent draft guide, or not so recent draft guide, I guess, is now outdated, is that the 19-year-old players have been boosted and can now spawn with level 9 skills. So 18-year-olds, on the other hand, can only spawn with level 7 skills or lower. So what this means is that the value of 19-year-old draftees have increased compared to in the past, and they can actually routinely spawn with 70 plus total skill points, putting them on a more even level with 18-year-old draftees, where if you think of it, a lot of 18-year-old draftees are between 50, 55 total skill points for decent prospects. And then if you find a 19-year-old with 70 total skill points, then that's a pretty good bargain, where you're assuming that your draftee is going to receive about 15 skill points, where if they were an 18-year-old. And then elastics aren't as big, but depending on which skills are level 9 or proficient, then that might be a good setup for that 19-year-old. And now transitioning to the scouting options. So when you're looking at scouting for the draft, the two main options and the two most common scouting options that managers use are the scouting combine and the group demonstration. Both options use 10 scouting points each, however, they do entirely different things. The scouting combine provides the ages and heights of every prospect, but does not provide any indication of their skills, whereas the group demonstration provides the star rating for all of the 1 and 2 gray ball prospects, as well as their listed position, but does not provide any of their ages or heights. So when put together, they can be pretty useful. I'm much more a scouting combine guy than I'm much more of a group demonstration guy than a scouting combine. I think both can be helpful, but historically I use the group demo a lot more than the scouting combine. And then moving on to the most simple form of scouting is to scout individually and conduct interviews. And while this individual scouting is not the most efficient way to scout, sometimes it is necessary to find some hidden gems. As for interviewing, that is the only way to view the prospect's potential, which is ultimately the most important thing when it comes to setting your draft order. And it'll also assign that player a grade rating, so A+, A, B+, and so on, when you interview them, which provides an indication of what their salary might be. And now finally, the third kind of scouting option is the additional practice drills. So after the first two options of scouting, typically managers will already have a good idea of how to order their prospects based on star rating, grade, potential, age, and height. So the drills are usually not needed. But with that being said, if you have a ton of scouting points that you have been holding on to, or you have a top pick and you would like some more information, the practice drills can be good to use. So you kind of use them as tiebreakers to know which players to rank above which other players. And then the big reason for the drills and why I think they're incredibly helpful if you have extra points is while box scores can be used to make some assumptions about players and their skills, the box scores should not be considered a reliable source of information. And that's where this third scouting option or the practice drills come into play. So the practice drills cost 10 points per drill, but show what all 48 skills look like in two categories. So you can see them on the screen there. It's, 2 categories for each one. So in theory, this means that you could use a whopping 50 scouting points if you have them, do all of the drills, and then you would know the entire skill sets of all of the players in the draft. I think that's a little bit egregious, and you probably don't need to do that. But if you have a ton of scouting points and that's what you want to do, more power to you. And now transitioning to what do the star and potential ratings mean? So the star ratings indicate the salary of the incoming draftee, and the higher the star rating is, the higher the player salary it is, as I said. So for instance, an A+ prospect will have a higher salary than an A- prospect. And while this does not always translate to which player is better overall, it will give you an indication of which player has a higher salary. So thinking about the skills that impact salary more or less, that can give you an idea of what you might be looking at. As for the potential ball tiers, I think they are more important. So shown on the screen here, I never recommend drafting a player with 3-ball potential or lower, as you typically cannot train them very long and they're only viable in lower leagues. 4-ball prospects, however, I think they can be viable for, some higher level leagues and can be viable for U21 as well. So 4-ball potential prospects can have 7 or 8 potential, so perennial all-star to superstar, or 7 to 8 potential. And then 5-ball potential prospects are the main thing that you are searching for and the main goal as to what you're trying to draft. These 5-ball potential prospects can have 9 to 11 potential, so MVP to all-time great. And then just know that 11 potential or all-time great potential players are incredibly rare. So don't expect to ever draft one. If you do, you are in like the 0.001%. But 9 and 10 potential players is what 5-ball primarily equates to. And then these players have the potential to be national team caliber players and to be trained to a point where they can perform in even the toughest leagues in BuzzerBeater. So now going to my ideal scouting plan. Looking at the scouting plan, I think it's a little bit more complex than it was seasons ago. So I kind of have 2 different plans based on how many scouting points you have to spend. So the first one that we're looking at is my ideal scouting plan for if you have like 50-ish scouting points to spend or less. So if you either just started BuzzerBeater and only have a couple seasons under your belt, or you just used a lot of scouting points a couple seasons ago and you only have 50, 55 scouting points or less, then this is the route that I would suggest. We're first starting with group demonstration, and this will reveal the star rating of about 18 to 20 players. You will typically have about 6 to 10 of those players will get revealed as 5-star prospects, so generally about 1/3, maybe 1/2 if you're really lucky. But about 6 to 10 of them will be 5-star prospects, and then all the ones that aren't 5-star prospects, you can move to the bottom of your draft order. And then this would set up for 10 points for this first step. Moving to the second step, you can interview all of the 5-star rated prospects, and if they're 4-ball or 5-ball potential, keep them towards the top. If they're 3-ball or lower potentials, then that's where you can also move them to the bottom of your draft board. The one exception is if there's a 19-year-old A-plus prospect that you think might be useful for cup games. As I said, since 19-year-olds can draft with like 75 total skill points, sometimes you can draft a 19-year-old who has really bad potential, but if you're not worried about training them, you just want a cup piece, then they can be really valuable as well. So you can place him in like the next tier below the top prospects, or if you just don't want to worry about picking up a player for the cup, then you can also move them down to the bottom. And then interviewing those is going to be about 12 to 20 scouting points, depending on how many 5-star prospects there were. But that puts you at using between 22 and 30 scouting points so far. So at this point, you've used 22 to 30 scouting points roughly. And then depending on how many scouting points you have left, you can either spend no further scouting points if you're happy with your top prospects in order. So let's say you have the second overall pick in the draft and you've scouted 2 5-5 prospects and a couple 5-4 prospects for, star rating and potential. Then saying, okay, well, I know I have like 16 scouting points left, but I'm pretty happy with my prospects of who I have at the top of my board, and I know I'll get at least one of my 5-5 prospects, then you don't necessarily have to keep scouting. If you are a little bit further down or you do want to continue scouting, you can spend 10 points on a specific drill. Primarily, I think this is useful if you're happy with your top prospects but are not set on the order of them yet. So like these are my top 4 or 5 guys, but I'm not sure which order I want them in. Then using that drill could be really useful to help order the top guys at your chart. And then the last option is you can randomly scout other players who weren't the grade like 1-2 ball grade prospects, but you can randomly scout the other prospects until you find more 5-star rating players to interview. And I think this is primarily only used for if you're not happy with your top prospects. So if you go through the draft and let's say you had 7 or 8 players from those original 18 to 20 that had 5-star skills, and then you interview them and you end up with just one that's a 5-star star rating as well as a 5-star potential, but you have the second or third pick and you want to try to find a couple more players, that's where I think you can randomly scout and interview more players if you wanted to. My more ideal scouting plan, so if you have 60 plus scouting points to spend, this is where I think using the scouting combine to reveal all ages and heights of prospects for 10 points is useful to pair along with the group demonstration, so kind of doing those both at the same time. Main reason for this is, as I said, 19-year-old prospects are much better than they used to be with the skill boosts, but I think 18-year-olds are still slightly more valuable and slightly more sought after on the transfer list, so they can probably sell for a little bit more as well if you're trying to sell your draft pick. Once you do the scouting combine and group demonstration, once again, you can interview all 5-star rating players from the group demo and move all those 3-ball potential players to the bottom of your draft board again. And then, depending on which route you're trying to go for your prospects, there's kind of 2 different ways that you can go about the next step here. So if you care more about the resale value of the player, scout the remaining 18-year-olds that were not in the group demo and interview all of the 5-star prospects. Or if you're planning on keeping and training your draftee, that's where instead of scouting all of the 18-year-old prospects that weren't in the group demo, you can scout all of the players that fit into your position/height range. So if you're like, I know I want to train and keep training guards, then that's where you can potentially look at just like point guards, shooting guards, or just look at players who are like 6'4" or shorter and interview those 5-star prospects. So even though it's like 18, 19-year-olds, since the 19-year-olds have better skills and can still have those MVP Hall of Famer like 9-10 potential, if you're planning on keeping the prospect, I think looking at 19-year-olds could be more beneficial for you if you are looking for a specific type of player. If you don't care about the type of player, as I said, just scouting the 18-year-olds first, I think probably gives you the better resale value for your draft because the 18-year-olds are going to be slightly more valuable still. And then the last practice or the last step is going to be the practice drills to reveal any skills as you see fit, or if you have extra points wanting to help order the prospects, then you can look at doing the drills. So after these first 4 steps, you're really looking at spending, 10, 20, 32, 60, 60 to 76 scouting points already right there. So the practice drills, if you feel like you need to use them, you can. But through those first 4 steps, you're already using a decent amount of scouting points. So just don't go overboard. I feel like a lot of times the drills can be useful, but ultimately don't change your draft order all that much. So while it can be nice to see the skills earlier, if you don't feel like you need to use the practice drills as like a tiebreaker or anything, I wouldn't recommend them, because like a 5-star prospect with 5-star potential and an A grade is naturally going to beat out like anything else regardless. So you don't have to worry about revealing skills for that player because you know they're going to be at the top of the board. And then the last thing I want to go over was just if you wanted the full draft experience. Right now, sometimes people ask like, how many scouting points would it take to reveal everything? According to my calculations, it takes roughly 185 scouting points to reveal the ages, heights, potential, star ratings, grades, box scores, and all 10 skills of every prospect in the draft. So about 185 scouting points would get it done. Obviously, there's no reason to do that because all of those like 1, 2, 3-star players you'll never want to draft. But if you were curious, 185 scouting points is what it would take for the full draft experience. And then just one last reminder that for Season 59, you must have your draft order submitted by February 5th. And then closing out this video, I just wanted to ask, what is your strategy for drafting and how many scouting points do you currently have?